MSPIFF45 is wrapped up. The Minneapolis St. Paul Film Festival. It's their 45th year of operation, and we decided to go again this year. Last year, Connor saw like 10 movies, and this year we saw 3. We were gonna see 4, but some shit happened. And by shit, I mean we both overslept and then went to different targets to meet up, so. But we did see 3. The first one we saw was a narrative picture, Carolina Caroline, starring Samara Weaving and Kyle Gallner. Connor, what is the plot of Carolina Caroline?
Carolina Caroline stars Caroline and Oliver. They're a couple of people. Oliver is a con man, and Caroline, fed up with her boring life, falls in love with him and wants to become a con man too. It escalates to them doing robberies, and it becomes something of a Bonnie and Clyde tale as they fall in love and commit crimes. So Aiden, what did you think of Carolina Caroline?
Carolina Caroline is pretty okay. It's good. It's a lot like a Hallmark movie. It's like this sappy romance. Boy comes into town of a small country girl and shows her the world, but it's a lot better than a Hallmark movie. But also like just kind of okay. It's perfectly fine. I like the leads a lot. There's a lot of country music in it, if that's your thing. It's not quite my thing, but there's a lot of country music. Yeah, I mean, there's some fun to be had. I like the first half, especially when they're running like cons, and then it becomes a bank heist movie and gets a little long towards the end, and it has to do like the tragedy of, you can never escape the criminal way if you do that stuff, and gets a little hokey towards the end. But I like the cast. I thought it was well shot. The music, even if it's not my style, is well integrated and important to the sort of not really the style, but the setting, the place, and it handles all that stuff well. And yeah, it's decently fun, and I think this one's getting a distribution in a couple months, so this is one that you could potentially see yourself. Connor, what'd you think of Carolina Caroline?
I thought Carolina Caroline was pretty okay. It kind of feels like I watched this movie Badlands recently with Emilio Estevez and what's her face from Carrie from Carrie, and it's pretty much the same concept, really. Small town girl is like, I want to commit crimes with my hunky boyfriend, but in that movie, it's actually not Emilio Estevez, it's Martin Sheen. Martin Sheen starts just fucking murdering people. He's just a terrible, terrible guy. Serial killer, basically. Mass murderer. And it's great. This movie reminded me a lot of Badlands if it was directed by Nicholas Sparks, because they're conning everybody and they're robbing people and holding people at gunpoint, but it's very romanticized when that happens. Everything's very romanticized. Everything's, shot very close up and intimate, and there's at points where people are questioning if it was a good romance or a real romance, or if he's like using her, but the movie's determined in saying like, no, it was a real romance and everyone else is just a fucking dick. Just misunderstood. He does at one point murder somebody on accident and he feels really bad about it.
Yeah, and then he kills himself.
Pretty much.
By a cop.
But it's one of those things where there's points of the movie where it's like a romantic drama, like a really the whole thing. There's some points that are like bank heists, which are moderately fun, and some of the con stuff is kind of fun. The acting's good, and there's some decent like conversations about the crime life. You don't get the impression Caroline is just like a naive girl who's going around with it, and she's just kind of like, you know, having fun, lost in the world, and decided this would be good. There are points where she realizes she's in over her head, which I think is kind of natural for a story like this, but by and large, I like how they handled it. But yeah, no, it really, when I was watching it, I literally watched Badlands like 3 days before. And I was like, this is just Badlands, but if Nicholas Sparks directed it. But yeah, no, I mean, it's a decent little romantic drama, crime film thing. I could easily have seen this being more of like a parody with like a Coen Brothers or something doing it, but which is kind of what I was hoping for, because I like that old Coen Brothers style before, you know.
Before the great cuckening.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's fine for what it was. I was hoping it was something else, but it was good. It was pretty well done for what it was. So Aiden, would you recommend Caroline?
For people like us, maybe not. Might be an okay date movie. Definitely a little romancy and, you know, womany. But it's not terrible. It's watchable. Certainly good enough for people who are into that genre, although I doubt that many people who watch this video would be.
Probably not.
Yeah, it's fine. Connor, would you recommend Caroline?
Yeah, probably not for the people that watch our channel, for the most part. I mean, the one thing is, for film festivals, we don't exactly typically cover the film festival type movies all that much. I do like them. Sometimes we do, but not very often, like the smaller ones. It feels like something where if you're like really into country music, you might catch the vibe of the soundtrack, or if you're going on like a date night, I feel like this one might be fun for a date night, kind of like a Bonnie and Clyde thing. I also think old people would probably like it a lot. Definitely. I wouldn't go so far as to call this a geezer teaser, because it's not like geezer exploitation. But I feel like old people would like it. Like, this seems like some shit, you know, Grandpa would like watching, or your dad, or your fucking uncle, or whatever.
Yeah, Dad would have loved this shit.
Yeah, I don't know. He just like The Hangover, but I feel like my uncle. Yeah, I feel like Uncle Bob would like this movie. Yeah, he'd probably vibe with this one.
Uncle Core.
Yeah, it's pretty Uncle Core, to be honest. That's a good word for it. And I'm sure, like, you know, his middle-aged wife with him would like it too. So, on that note, we watched the second movie. So I should probably grab the full title for it instead of just half-assing it, since these are all not out yet. The next movie we watched was Knife, The Attempted Murder of Salman Rushdie, which is a documentary film. Aiden, what happens? I don't want to say the plot. It's a documentary. What's it about?
Salman Rushdie was a novelist in the 80s. I mean, he still is a novelist, but in the 80s he wrote a book called The Satanic Verses, which was highly critical of the Muslim faith in certain ways, even though it was a fictional. Yeah. Which, you know, he had a fatwa declared against him. He was in hiding for a number of years, and a few years ago, out in 2020 or 2021, someone attacked him at a public event, and he was stabbed a number of times, lost an eye, was hospitalized for a number of months, and still has some physical ailments from it, and he and his wife turned it into a documentary narrated by him, recounting his experience and his recovery after that, and some background on the whole situation. So it's a look into that whole situation, into its current state as he's continued to recover and return to normal life. And also Wes Anderson's in the movie for like 4 minutes, which is really strange. But Connor, what'd you think of the
phone, via telephone? He phones into the movie. I thought it was a really interesting documentary. It's kind of an interesting because I didn't know about this story. I think the kind of the satanic verses and that whole controversy and them declaring that he needed to be executed and all that shit kind of happened before my time.
Mm-hmm.
So if I read about this attack in 2021 or 22 or whatever when it happened, I didn't know what the fuck it was. So it was interesting. The one thing I like about this is it doesn't exclusively go into the knife attack. That's kind of like the framing is the recovery for the knife attack. They do go into it a bit at the end. But really, in this framing device of like his recovery that they recorded, they talk about his history. Primarily the history surrounding like his exile and his time writing the satanic verses and then of course the fallout from writing that book and it becoming this kind of like controversial book where bookstores were like, well, do we carry it? Do we, etc. That kind of thing. And it's a really interesting story, and I think the fact that, well, the reason he was attacked was some guy who wasn't around during the original controversy. He's like 25 or something, attacked him, who just kind of saw about him on YouTube and decided he'd go up to the guy. So he wasn't really expecting it. And I find that to be sort of, I mean, obviously it's something that really happened, but it does make kind of an interesting, like, retrospective framing and, like, the fact that this has come back and, like, kind of talking about, like, what are our First Amendment rights? What are we allowed to do and not? And, I mean, even beyond the First Amendment, just, like, as like, human rights or, like, even as just literarily... if you write something controversial, obviously, apparently, it can bounce back to you 40 years later. So, I found that very interesting. I thought he was an interesting subject. He had an interesting life before and after the satanic verses, as well as this kind of epic story that happened around all that. And then, of course, this newest development from a few years back. And it all rounded out to be pretty interesting. I thought it was well done. I thought the pacing on it was all pretty good, and I found it interesting. Very critical of Iran, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
Which, like, it's fair. Iran and its leader were trying to get the man killed, but at this film festival, it seems a little awkward because there's a lot of people in Minneapolis, believe it or not, are against the Iran war. So looking at it fairly critically, that regime that was outgoing. And obviously I don't want to talk too much about the Iran war here, but the point of the matter is, I did find it, I found it interesting, and I think it's kind of was enlightening on showing kind of talking a little bit more behind the curtain on the problems with that, whether or not you agree with the active U.S. campaign there. But regardless, I think that was interesting timing, and yeah, it was a pretty good documentary. So Aiden, what was your thoughts on this movie?
I think one of the best parts of Knife. I think one of the best parts of Knife was Rushdie's own narration and recounts of the events. He's a very charismatic person. He's got that dry British wit and is more than willing to have some fun at his own expense about pretty much everything that's happened in his life, which brings a lot of life to the documentary, as well as kind of giving you an impression of who he is alongside all this history and background on the satanic verses. And
dude, Obi, what
out of the box
is your problem right now, dude?
Yeah, I really liked that element. There's also some very nice visual stuff. I mean, a lot of it is him laying in a hospital bed with his disgusting dead eye poking out his chin. But
Yeah.
they did some nice like animated interstitials with this like sketchbook style white lines on black that look really nice, and a lot of archival footage of his time in exile when he was being hidden by the British government, and a very bizarre scene where he's trapped in the Super Mario World void,
Oh yeah.
and he's just sitting.
Okay, just Obi. We're gonna have to pause and pull Obi out. He's being fucking obnoxious.
He's just sitting in a black void playing Super Mario World and talking about how it's the only thing that gives his life meaning while he's in exile.
Some sort of archival. He's like, I'm really good at the Nintendo these days, and he was playing I think it was Super Mario 3, if I remember right.
No, it was Super Mario World.
Oh yeah, it was, because he was playing the Super Famicom.
Yeah.
It was interesting. We're just gonna have to pull him out. He's being fucking annoying. Obi.
But yeah, very good documentary, interesting subject, incredibly well told by the man himself, who has a lot of interesting perspectives on his own life and the knife attack that serves as the backdrop for this whole event. Wes Anderson appears on the phone, which is really jarring and weird. But yeah, it's a very good documentary. I'm hoping it gets some nice distribution somewhere, so that more people can see it. Very, very well constructed documentary picture. Connor, would you recommend Knife?
Yeah, I'd recommend it. I thought it was a pretty good documentary. Surely it'll be something that's picked up by Hulu or Netflix or Amazon or something. One thing I found interesting about last year, which was my first MSPIFF, was that you could kind of just see, like, on Facebook, the ad for whatever fucking movie I watched 6 months ago was finally getting picked up by Peacock or whatever the hell, and you're like, oh. Ricky, which we watched last year, or I watched last year, is going to AMC theaters somehow.
Yep.
The movie was okay. But that's officially coming out now. Not yet, but in a couple weeks. But yeah, no, I would recommend keeping an eye out for this. This is something, I mean, it's like an hour and a half. I'm sure it'll wind up on Netflix or something, and it's worth a quick gander through. It's an interesting story. So, Aiden, would you recommend this movie as well?
Yeah, big recommend. Definitely my favorite of the year. Very entrancing story about a interesting public figure who's had a hell of a time in his basically entire life. Big recommend from me. Easy favorite of the MSPIFF stuff we saw this year.
Out of 3.
Out of 3, but you know.
Next year.
It
Next
is.
year I'll take a day off.
Number
we'll get,
one
like,
of 3
5.
still ain't bad. You know, there's 2 below you. But yeah, it was good. What's the name of the guy from the last spot?
Peter Schill.
Alright, the last movie...
Schill?
Isn't it Sushil?
Schill?
Peter Sechel?
Okay.
Sechel. The last movie we saw was The Last Spy, a retelling of the creation of the OSS and its transition into the CIA by one of its former spy masters, Peter Sechel, who is 100 years old, still alive, and loved to fuck.
Yeah?
Connor, what is The Last Spy about?
So Peter Sechel survived. He fled. His family was rich wine people, and basically he managed to escape the Nazis. And eventually in World War II, he joins the OSS because of his knowledge of Europe. Later that transitioned into him working in the CIA, and he did a number of things through the 1950s and 40s, and did about 20 years with the CIA, and then he called it quits. And we learn about his time and kind of the ups and downs and things he thought was bullshit, and we hear about how his first wife, that he was a swinger for some reason, and his first wife was kind of a hoe and kept cheating on him. I presume outside of their swinging activities, but I don't know how exactly you define such a thing.
Yeah.
So, Aiden, what did you think of The Last Spy?
The Last Spy is pretty good and interesting, but I don't know if it's really for Peter as a subject. I think learning about the OSS and the way it became the CIA, and also the fact that, like, you'd kind of think all the CIA bullshit was kind of a newer invention, but no.
Well,
like,
especially the way he's talking about it.
He's
at the start,
one of the
he's
first
like,
things he says. He's like, things changed so much, and I couldn't stand by it anymore in good consciousness. And then the first thing he says, he's like, my first mission in the OSS, we went out to Asia and started funding terrorist groups and rigging elections. And the reason he got sick of the CIA is because the other people who did all that stuff after him were marginally worse at it, but he also was apparently really bad at it because
I was gonna say it's a grass is greener thing based on what this guy is saying.
He was stationed in Berlin during the Cold War, and the whole Berlin operation was just a giant disaster where everyone was just fucking each other and then getting caught and then getting arrested and executed. And he was like, everyone else should have learned from all the mistakes I made horribly, but they didn't, so I got mad and left. And there's interesting stuff in there. He goes on a lot of weird sex tangents where he's like, every time I was in East Berlin, I was just plowing bitches, and then my wife from Berlin started cheating on me, and we went to Hong Kong, and we couldn't really leave, so there was nothing to do but get wasted all day and, you know, have giant cuck parties. And then I moved back to America, and we did nothing all day but drink and have giant cuck parties. He lived an interesting life, to say the least. He still does. Well, no, I guess like his modern life actually seems like pretty much every grandpa's, where
he's like 100 years old.
He takes his little motorized stair wheelchair down and eats fruit with his wife.
And his obese cat.
His obese cat. But yeah, the background history stuff was interesting, the OSS to CIA stuff, but Peter, as much as the movie is technically about him, like, he has this Holocaust story, and you'd think it'd be this sort of like dramatic tale, but really he's like, well, my family was rich, so we left Germany for France, and then we lived in a chateau in France until we moved to America, and that's it. That's it. So, you know.
Yeah, not that it wasn't dramatic, but it wasn't exactly the Diary of Anne Frank.
Yeah, and that's like the first chapter of the movie. It's not interesting, but it's also, you know, maybe not an entire chapter worthy. I don't know. The pacing drags a little bit. I think this one was a little too long. There's interesting stuff here and there, but it does kind of get bogged down in random stories about this guy's life that are
I don't think he was an uninteresting subject, but I think they wanted a subject, and this is the only motherfucker that was alive.
Mm-hmm.
And he does have an interesting enough story, like a refugee and blah blah blah, but like, by and large, his entire life was like, and it just worked out.
Yeah, there's some weird grandpa sex story tangents. You know, he was in the early days of the CIA where nothing was planned and nobody had any clue what they were doing, there's some funny stories from that, but
yeah,
it is a little bit narratively unfocused outside of the interesting background stuff going on. I
also feel like beyond his background, you kind of have this thing where you got these crutch interviews, you know, where it's like Peter will be like, they'll be like, what did you think of this? And then Peter will have a little bit to say, and then you got like 5 authors who come in and start talking about the history and stuff in more depth.
Yeah, they got like the John Madden of
historians. We went to try to overthrow this government, and then my wife got plowed. Not me.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's how most of his era stories went.
He never seems to have... He doesn't have, like, any dramatic wins in his time. He pretty much has, like, completely undramatic failures where it's like, oh, well, we tried this operation and it failed terribly. So anyway, we went back to the club and my wife got plowed. And then John Madden comes on and gives a bunch of background about the Cold War.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's, you know.
It's like, have you ever heard of the Iron Curtain? And basically, it was like an invisible curtain. There was no curtain. There was no war, there was no curtain. But there was a war and there was a curtain. In a way of speaking.
It's far from the worst documentary.
Well, his
I've
biggest
ever seen,
victories
but
were they were like Eisenhower was like they're gonna start moving in on East Germany, and then I went out there and I sent my guys in the field, and then they told me actually it doesn't look like anyone's gonna deploy, and they're just sitting there.
Yeah.
And I got a Medal of Freedom for that, and it's like
perhaps the funniest thing about the movie is how much he hates every historical figure he mentions, where he's like, "Oh, I met Eisenhower once. He was the biggest piece of shit I ever met, and I wanted to fucking kill him. If I had the opportunity, I would have stabbed him."
Party.
General Patton, biggest retard I've ever met. The biggest.
It's cut
you know. General Patton, biggest asshole I ever met. And he just goes through every historical figure basically like that.
I mean, pretty much.
That shit's kind of
well,
funny.
Except for the one guy. There's one guy who's like, yeah, he like overthrew Guatemala. It's the most fucked up thing that ever happened. Then we destabilized Iran, and it was never fixed, and it's just so fucked up what happened. But that dude was so nice, and like we would
his
swap.
His wife had the tightest pussy I've ever felt.
It was weird. He's like, this guy was just a scumbag. He just absolutely wrecked geopolitics and had no foresight. But his wife made a mean casserole and had a tight ass, so.
Yeah, it's a movie, man.
Quite the movie.
Connor, what did you think of The Last Spy?
Yeah, no, I'm with you on it. I thought there was a lot of interesting stuff. It was really, there was a lot of good archival footage from everything. They were hitting all the wells there. And I thought Peter wasn't uninteresting, but for the specific story that they're trying to tell of like the OSS to CIA, and also they're trying to frame it. The movie tries really hard to frame it like there's the good old days where they were like the best spy organization of all time, and then they became this just shitty thing, and then it turns out they were just some shitty thing the whole time. I've been reading it, but the movie wants to really open it and frame it as like the OSS was like integrity, and the early CIA, man, there was nothing like it. But in reality, the tactics haven't changed. Give weapons to terrorists, be a drunk swinger, send people to their death on ill-planned operations, and then
call it a day.
Go back to your buddy's house to swap wives. Like that's pretty much what the movie was. And I don't get the vibe that CIA's changed very much. And they're like, yeah, some of this shit was like we're just leading through paranoia, and like honestly, like these were terrible operations that just destabilized regions that had like maybe one tiny thing that was a little bit fucked up with them, and then we just totally destroyed those nations forevermore. And it's like, yep, okay, so the CIA is unironically never changed. Yeah, he did talk about stealing fecal, but at first I thought he meant cum, so I thought he made one of his agents give some guy the gluck, and I was really confused.
Suck it out and spit it in a jar for
Well, he was also, at times, he was kind of hard, and I forgive him because he's like 100, but at times he would kind of mumble, and you're like, what the fuck is he saying here? But, yeah, no, I thought he had an interesting life. I don't know if it was, it wasn't like, I bet you if you made this documentary 40 years ago when there was a bigger sample size of people from that era alive, you probably could have found a more interesting subject, but now you gotta take what you get. And there is this overlying thesis of like the good old days of the CIA and OSS before it, but it's just like in reality this guy has just confirmed that there was never a glory day. I've been and you guys will see this video in like a year probably, but I've been working on going through the Ian Fleming James Bond movies books to make a video on all of them at once. And one of my favorite things is in like almost every book, James Bond, who's basically just Ian Fleming's self-insert, because Ian Fleming did a similar role to like this guy, except for Britain. And they're like, the CIA is a bunch of fucking idiots, and they just complain about it the whole time, and you're like, well, that's probably just Ian Fleming's locker room talk.
No.
And then it'll be like the Soviets, it'll be like a scene from the Soviets, which is obviously speculative, and half the time there's a cartoon supervillain with them. But they're just like, God damn it, the CIA is so fucking stupid. They just keep giving money to terrorists and doing this and that. Like, it wasn't even particularly a secret. And based on what this guy says versus what Ian Fleming goes on about in a bunch of his books from like the 1940s and 50s, or the 1950s, it seems like the perception it was pretty accurate, Ian Fleming's. And he liked to complain about it in his books. And I thought it was just like, couldn't be that bad. But based on the sound of this, I feel like it kind of really affirmed that. So at least when I talk about, if I manage to bring up that Ian Fleming likes to complain about the CIA and all of his James Bond novels, which isn't usually plot relevant, it kind of just comes out of nowhere where James Bond sits there in his thinking chair about how fucking stupid the CIA is. So if that happens, maybe this movie will help me with that video that I'm halfway through and I've been working on for a year. It takes a while. But anyways, there's your preview for that. So, yeah, short MSPIFF. Oh wait. Do you recommend this documentary?
This one's interesting because with a lot of documentaries, they don't see theatrical releases, so this will almost certainly be a streaming thing.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting, probably in kind of unintended ways, and I think it would make for a decent background noise documentary when it eventually releases on Amazon or Hulu or wherever it goes. So I think my answer is probably a yes, but it's certainly, like, especially compared to Knife, which we just talked about, it is night and day. This is a clumsy, meandering, slightly awkward documentary about an interesting time in American history, but it's certainly far from perfect. Connor, would you recommend The Last Spy?
You know what? While we're talking about spies and James Bond, I'm going to bring up another documentary this reminds me of. Probably like 10 years ago now, Hulu put out a George Lazenby documentary, the second James Bond, who's in one movie. It was just about him doing a bunch of drugs and banging women while he was trying to be James Bond and then being too drunk and lazy to continue being James Bond. And then they just were like, fuck it, we're going to rehire Sean Connery.
Yep.
And it made me think about that right now because I just brought up James Bond. I think what they should do before distribution, because it's probably come out in like 6 months officially, you restructure it. This guy survived the Holocaust and he's a swinger. And he was a spy. I think you reconstruct the last swinger, dude. The last S parentheses winger, and then PY afterwards. It might be kind of hard to read. It might be hard to telegraph what I'm saying right now.
You could do like a big S, and then attached to the top is swinger, and then attached to the bottom is spy.
But then or they could just do it they could just start calling it double S, but then you kind of run into a different problem.
Yeah, I suppose you do.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was entertaining. I thought there was good footage. And I didn't find Peter uninteresting. I thought his story was interesting.
He's an interesting film.
But the thesis of the documentary fails to land. I think they should have reconstructed the opening thesis to, like, maybe the CIA was always a little bit clumsy, but at least they had
heart.
Spirit. Yeah, I mean, they kind of tried to pull that shit at the end. They're like, oh, he had heart. I think you up the Peter Swinger stories, because I'm sure they probably, based on the amount that stayed in, there has to be a few on the cutting room floor. So I feel like you could go two ways. Up the history, or cut a little bit of the history and put in more Peter Swinger stories. I think either way. I think there's a little editing this could do, but I think there's something here. We have an entertaining storyteller. We have interesting history. We just have a really muddled thesis.
Yeah.
But even as is, it's fine. If it sounds like an interesting subject, I'm sure it'll be free on Amazon or Tubi or something in a couple months. So just worth a watch.
You could do worse.
You could do worse. Oh yeah. I suppose that was kind of anticlimactic. Anyways, we'll return for 2027. I was busy. I wanted to see The Escape from New York, re-release and go to the cinematographer's little panel thing last year. I saw Ang Lee. That was fun. The guy who did Jurassic Park and Escape from New York cinematography.
We were gonna see The Captive, which is a movie about the guy who wrote Don Quixote getting imprisoned in
We slept
the Middle
in
East.
and we're like, we can only do this if we rendezvous at a Target. And then I accidentally sent Aiden. I was like, well, we'll meet at this one Target. Then I was like, no, there's actually, I was thinking of a different Target than the one I actually picked. So then I sent Aiden the wrong, I pulled up the right Target and I meant to send him that address. Somehow I still sent him the wrong Target. So he was at one and I was at the other. And by then we were totally fucked.
Yeah.
So we missed that one. I didn't have my student pass this year. I don't know if I'm doing anything deranged like the 10 from last year. Maybe when I'm retired. I feel like retired people are like, I went to 50 movies. Like, shut up, bitch.
Hey, there was someone at
you know,
the
but she
last
seemed
spy who
nice.
saw 20.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, they're retired. They're old. They can pull that off. 20 movies? That's a lot of movies.
There was barely 3 I wanted to see, let alone 20.
Some people I think are fanatics. I feel like last year, I feel like I could have probably scraped together, but some of the scheduling was so hard because it was like I would love to see this movie, and then it's like it's available Tuesday at 2 p.m. and it's like, well, can't pull that off. I got a job.
If I have some unspent vacation hours, I'll take a day off.
Yeah, that's kind of my mindset. This year I'm pretty busy. Last year I was busy, which is why I didn't have much pullover. Like how we're trying to come up with excuses on why we failed. We failed to do an adequate spiff video.
Yeah.
No, it was good. It was fun. We'll do it again next year.